Hello, I am Reverend Trina Bose North. I serve at Crown Heights United Methodist Church, and I am filling in for Dr. McCullough. We are making a video for his class for Intro to Ministry. I'm joined with Dr. Mickey Potts, who is a psychologist who is a pastoral counselor who does a lot of work with ministers in the conference. So he's here to talk to us about self-care. Mickey, the first questions that we'd like to kind of ask is, could you tell us about your practice and your work with the ministers in this area, especially in developing one's ministerial identity?
Mm-hmm. Well, it goes back to even my correction I made you. I'm not a psychologist. I'm a pastoral counselor. I do counseling. Psychologists do counseling. Social workers do counseling. But I'm a pastoral counselor, which implies and says to me, I have a particular perspective on the work of counseling, psychotherapy, marriage counseling, etc., which is influenced by my ordination and my education in theology. And so I come to the counseling profession from a philosophical, theological background, not a psychological background. I don't do psychological tests, for instance. I can read them and I use them, but I don't give them, I don't assess them. So for me, I guess a quick word of what pastoral means in terms of the practice of what I do. I always say it's all about relationships. That's what makes it pastoral. So counseling, coaching, and helping relationships be better. That means theologically, my theology, my working theology, is very incarnational. Mm-hmm. God with us, God present in the relationship, God at work in and through the dynamics of relationships.
And through that relationship, finding God more.
God
more.
Is at work in it. I am a representative of God in it. God is in it with the other party. And so what informs me is that kind of incarnational part of theology.
How did you get to serve pastors as your specialty?
Well, for a part of my credentialing was a CPE supervisor, clinical pastoral education, which was education for ministry based upon the clinical method, action, reflection. That came from St. Paul's many years ago. That was a part of their curriculum. And so I was serving as chaplain to various institutions, and I was, as a CPE supervisor, would bring clergy into those institutions. They would be chaplains to a certain segment and then I would supervise them in their work, their visitation skills. Their
Why were you drawn
skills.
to them?
Drawn to the pastors?
The pastor role. Yeah.
Well, because when I was in seminary, I took a CPE quarter as a part of my curriculum, and it turned me around. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And
got your feet on the ground.
Well, it helped me make sense of what my call was. Mm-hmm. You know, I was called, but I wasn't sure I was going to preach or what am I called. And I got to Duke and got exposed to ministry beyond the church in the chaplaincy role.
So
and that's what turned me on. And so
when you're working with ministers, what is your hope for them as they enter into your space? Whoever walks in.
I call it pastoral identity. Mm-hmm. I see ministry not as a set of things we do and skills and competencies we gain. It is being a good preacher, being a good administrator. It's not what I do. Ministry is not what I do. It's who I am. I take on a new identity. I think that's what ordination is about. Mm-hmm. We say set apart. It means it's not, that's why when I do therapy or counseling, I'm not doing technically anything that other professions do. But I do it from my identity as a clergy. That may mean I use religious language and we use the Bible. It may not mean it, because what makes it pastoral isn't the client. What makes it pastoral is my understanding and my perspective on it. So I think pastors have a view of life. The best metaphor I can give is you have a different view of your flock when you're at the pulpit looking out than the laity do looking up. And that, because there's different people, different things, and
We've
so
been in their homes. We've
yeah,
talked to
you've heard their
different
issues.
families. Yeah.
You know who's connected to who and who's in conflict, and the sheep may not know that, or only know a bits and piece of it. And so the model for ministry, or the model for pastoral, is shepherd. And a shepherd isn't one of the sheep. A shepherd's a shepherd. And the sheep may know more about the sheep on either side of them and the grass in front of their face. But the shepherd knows where the watering hole is and what lies over the next, and I always say the sheep walk on 4 feet and the shepherd walks on 2.
Yes.
Yeah. And we can be behind them or we can be ahead of them, but we have a different perspective and we have a different role and we have responsibility for the whole, whereas the laity have certain responsibilities, and certainly it's a shared ministry. And that's what I say. So pastoral means you have a different perspective on leadership. And I think for the sake of the intro to ministry aspect we're talking about, most of us came to ministry called from the laity into it. So we know what it is to be a laity. And it's probably because we had some satisfaction and fulfillment and affirmation in being good laity.
Yeah.
Well, ordination doesn't make you a better layperson. It's not
It shifts something.
Once you acknowledge publicly that you have a call to ministry and that is validated in some way, you enter the licensure process, you get voted on by your PPR or whatever, life changes. Your attitude toward the church changes. The church's attitude toward you change. You may not feel like you're a minister. You're the same person you were the day before. But all of a sudden, their relationships change. Again, I said it's all about relationship. And you're going to get real weird responses and you're not going to understand it. Unless you understand that you have now been set apart. Whether you have your credentialing is not the point.
Yeah.
The point is the call was acknowledged. Then your movement toward ministry, your education, is to help you become a better instrument of God's peace. That's why I have St. Francis above my head up here.
Right now.
That it's not to get you there. You're there. Now you're honing your skills and becoming a better leader and understanding the context of what you're going to do.
In your observation, where do clergy people and their families seem to experience high levels of stress? What are the areas that bring stress to clergy and their families?
I think clergy have a unique stress. A lot of this, this gets kind of technical, and we don't have the time to go into it, but Edmund Friedman, who was one of my mentors, wrote in his book, burnout is not a product of overwork. Burnout is a product of the interlocking triangles of which we're a part, meaning we have families of origin, nuclear families, church families, we have a relationship with bishops, we have a relationship with DSs, and we're in the middle. I've got a diagram here you can take with you if you want to, which I call the United Methodist Ministry. Here's the pastor who relates to the congregation, who has a variety of relationships, who has a spouse or somebody at home they go home to, who has a mom or dad or cousin who's sick in the hospital, who has a DS that has their own issues, and then who has a relationship with the bishop, and then you have relationships on the outside. It's like a spider web.
It does. I feel it.
Yeah. We live that day in and day out, and stress in this situation may not surface in this situation. It may stress over here. If you get knotted up with your congregation because of an issue in your congregation, and they're going to call the DS is going to call you, and you're going to have to, and then that's going to go to the cabinet, and now you're dealing with when the issue is over here. And so that's very stressful, and you're in that all the time. When I say you're pastoral, it's identity. It's not what you do. You can't turn that off.
This is a very relational job.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
All the time.
Yeah.
I was saying to him, we're not on call all the time. We're on call anytime.
Yeah.
I know what it is to be on call. You might not have any work to do, but your time is not your own. And you decide to go out for dinner with your wife because you're on call and she comes up. And then you get a call, it's gone. If you don't get a call, it's great.
Yeah.
But a pastor, I mean, I've had people Christmas Eve.
Yeah. Vacations.
Yeah. You know, there is no, so having ways of managing that so you can have those times, I think is a learning thing. It's not selfish, it's really protecting yourself and your family. The other is the boundaries between work and home are very clouded. You live in a parsonage that's 100 feet from the back door of the church
That you don't own.
that you don't own, that they own.
Yeah.
And if the toilet doesn't flush, you got to go back to them and get permission.
Yeah.
You can't act in your own interest without including them in very personal, private matters. If you're having an argument in your family, the church can hear that because you got people coming and going. So it's really hard to and I think that's where the stress comes. How do you set a boundary for self-care?
Mm-hmm.
Because it's real easy for you to keep borrowing from yourself to meet the needs of everybody else, family, friends, church, and you end up depleted. The operative piece of scripture, I've got to get this in because this is for me, the essence of this. It's when Jesus in the synoptics three times, so it must have been important, said, love your neighbors, you love yourself.
Mm-hmm.
Love God. Okay. Reuben Job said, stay in love with God. That's your prayer life. That's your worship. That's your biblical studies. That's your way of making sure that you have that connection with God that informs your pastoral work in your personal life. But it said, love your neighbor as you love yourself. And I always thought the operative word there is as. Because as has two meanings. One is quantity.
As much as.
As much as. And I would say no more, no less. Because I deal with a lot of codependency, which says your well-being is more important than my well-being, so I got to get you okay so I can be okay. And if you do that, nobody's ever going to be okay. So when you don't love yourself, that's a sin. Just like when you don't love the other, that's a sin. And I think the sin of many clergy isn't that they don't love the church and love their people. It's they don't love themselves. Now you have to understand, you're a child of God, they're a child of God, and God wants good things for both of you. That's a covenant.
Yeah.
So when you say, your well-being is just as important to me as my well-being, that's a covenant.
Mm-hmm.
So, but I need to know what I need to do to be okay and stay okay. And if I don't know what I need to do to self-soothe, to fill up, and I'm constantly saying, well, your well-being is more important to me than my well-being, I'm going to burn out. I'm going to get stressed. I'm going to maybe end up doing self-soothing things that are not good.
That just feel good.
That make you feel good. That's addictions and affairs and dumb mistakes because you're trying to do that and you get unconscious about that. So I'm saying, have places you go to play, have hobbies, have relationships outside the church that are friendships and fun. Fully embrace the time away. Have time with your family. And that's not selfish. That's knowing yourself and loving yourself.
That was very clear what you just said. We've talked about some of the pitfalls and the stressors, but really the hope is that we can live into self-care.
That's right.
And you just named
That's it.
Hobbies, friends.
Love yourself as much as you love others. No more, no less. Now, here's what complicates it. As has the second meaning. Temporal. As this is going on, this is going on. As I'm loving you, I'm loving myself. Which says, it's not I'm going to love you today and get around to me tomorrow. Because you never get around to you tomorrow. Something always interferes. So it's what is it that I have to give that I can give and still be okay? I'm going to give everything I have, but I can't give more than I have because it depletes me. So it may be that I have to work hard today so I can take a vacation, but you can't say, well, I'll give and then I'll make up for it. No, no, no. I'm really tired today. I have a cold today. I don't feel well. I can't do that. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I'll get back to you later.
Yeah.
You know, I've got more on my plate today than I could. Which means you've got to learn to say no. That's the boundary issue. And saying no isn't being selfish, but it also means you have to have a slightly higher pain tolerance in those you're trying to lead.
That's true.
Because when you say no to what they consider to be important and you can't do it, it's not you don't want to do it. It's not that somebody else is more important. It's just there's X amount of you to go around. And if you don't protect that, it's like children. Children are not going to give mama a day off, whether mama's sick or not, you know.
I had a boss who, at 5 o'clock, she would write in her calendar, 5 p.m., home.
Right.
And what that meant to her was, I have an appointment. You know, I honor my 10 a.m. appointments, and I will honor my 5 p.m.
That's right.
appointment.
And you may have to do it just that way. And then you could say to others, no, I have a previous engagement.
Yeah, I have an appointment.
Yeah, or have an
Have a
appointment.
meeting.
Have a meeting.
Yeah.
And they don't have to know what it is, because it's not important. And that's you taking care of yourself. But we feel taking care of ourselves many times is selfish. I say no, that's loving yourself. And I think the standard or the model for relationships, biblical model for relationships, is covenant, not contract. Contract is I'll do this and you do that. I'll work this many hours and you'll pay me this amount of money. I won't do this if you won't do that. Marriages are set up that way. Covenants are your well-being is just as important to me as my own. No more, no less. The church says that to the pastor says that to the church. Then you say, okay, if it's at my expense, I can say ouch. And that matters to you. And if it matters to you, then if it's not working for you, it's not working. So we're going to work it where it works well enough for both of us. So we will compromise because your well-being is just as important to me as my own.
What caution do you have for new pastors for sustaining ministry?
Self-care.
Yes. Yeah.
You will burn out. When you're excited about it and you got your first church or you're finally credentialed or, wow, I'm getting to do what we used to call full-time Christian service. And you get a lot of accolades and you get a lot of
It's an
honor and people put you on the pedestal and people seek you out and it meets your needs to be needed and to be, we can get into that. But you can't sustain that. It will wear out, it'll wear thin, and you'll get to a place where you start resenting the people who come to you. You know you're burning out. We call that compassion fatigue in my business. There's just so, and when you get to that place where you say, I got to do it, rather than, God's, I want to, or that, it's obvious God's putting this before me, you're burning out. And that's when